This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome everyone to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. This is our special Fight the Future Minute podcast. I'm Kurt North, and you are listening to our coverage of minute 54 of the X-Files Fight the Future. This minute begins at 53 minutes as the Well-Manicured Man asks a question of the Syndicate and ends at 53:59 as the Smoking Man points out how the aliens still need them. To discuss this minute, I'm joined once again by Darren Mooney. Darren, how are you doing today, mate?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Are you enjoying the minutes so far that we've been doing? Have you got enough off your chest?
I don't. Trust me, I'm not the one you have to ask that to. The real question is, are the listeners still there? I hope you guys are. I really hope you are.
You didn't get it, did you? Have you got enough off your chest? You see, I can do them as well.
See what you did there. Sorry, apologies. It's been a long day.
It's fine. It's okay. So we're here to discuss minute 54. But no, in seriousness, how have you found the last few minutes and how we're doing the podcast as a whole, really, with this whole minute by minute way that we're doing? I know it was a Star Wars thing originally, wasn't it? But it's a really interesting concept, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, it allows you to unpack like so much kind of stuff. And again, it's worth noting that again, I think one of the things that works really well about the format of having the minute is that it allows the conversation to branch in interesting ways, because your one rule is that you really can't go back too far, you can't go forward too far, because you don't want to step on the last minute and you don't want to step on the next minute because you want to have something to discuss then. But otherwise you can head up, down, sideways, back and forth. You can talk about just about anything. I mean, we had the kind of discussion about like Armin Muller-Stahl versus John Neville in terms of casting foreign character actors' stakes, or the kind of wonder of doing location footage as a location shooting as a kind of a power flex. So it's open and can go in various different directions. I'm kind of curious, I have to admit, when we were marking these out and when I was like, okay, I've marked how long a minute is, I've marked what I want to talk about in these minutes, these 2 minutes are going to be kind of tough because there's not as much delineation as there were between the first two. I think when we mentioned the first minute that we did together, it's very much, it's the Well-Manicured Man is introduced, like right down to the second. Yeah. And even in the first minute that we have, or the last minute that we talked about there, the shot is, from him getting out of the car, going in there, introducing, Strughold, and then to getting to the meat of the conversation. So it's like, okay, I know that I can talk about when he gets in the car, and then just maybe the way the shots are constructed. Whereas with these 2 minutes we're about to talk about here, it's kind of interesting because it's a conversation, and, the conversation, the way you want to talk about the conversation is always going to be the whole thing as opposed to, well, just the first half of it. So I'm very curious how we're going to split this out. Welcome to Discussing Fight the Future Minute, where we go minute by minute through the podcast, discussing Fight the Future minute by minute.
That has got to be my new podcast. I'm going to put that to Tony. But speaking of Tony, can you imagine doing the first minute with, I think Carl, Sarah, and Tony did them, I think, where you've just got 20th Century Fox and the opening crawl with the X-Files liquidation and things like that. I
imagine you can get quite a bit out of the 20th Century Fox logo now, I imagine. It's actually a really great time to be talking about the 20th Century Fox logo. Enjoy it, because you're never going to see it again. It's really disconcerting. Yeah. As somebody who's like going to press screenings, it looks like somebody's decapitated the logos. It looks like an act of very careful vandalism, like really meticulous, very careful. They sanded down and polished it, but it's like somebody stole the top half of a logo. It's really strange.
Yeah, it is. It's strange how that. I know obviously the reasons why they've done it, but it does feel a bit strange when you see. It's one of those staples, isn't it? Especially for the amount of years that it's been going, and it's one of those things that everyone knows, and to have it change so much is kind of off-putting in a way. But it is what it is, unfortunately. I keep saying it is what it is. I keep going back to The Irishman, so I apologise. But
Well, I mean, it's a good choice. The Irishman is a wonderfully kind of conspiratorial kind of look at it. Like, no, I would legitimately argue the Irishman's a great companion piece to the X-Files because it's a very conspiratorial look at the kind of 20th century American history. It's again, it's very much like JFK or the X-Files meets The Godfather, which I really, really love about it. And again, it has all these intersections and it has this meditation. Again, intertwining that with the idea of the great man theory of history, which is another core X-Files theme, and kind of like just coming back to the idea of what's really important is to be a good person and possibly a good father to the people you're responsible with. Sorry, this has been the Irishman minute.
With a minute within a minute within a minute. The Irishman minute would be quite a long one to do, wasn't it? Because it's like 3 hours 23 minutes or something. But anyway, we digress. We need to talk about minute 54. Just double check which minute I'm doing there. Minute 54. So we'll delve into the minute right now. So a new extraterrestrial biological entity. Is the words that are uttered by Strughold, which is enough to elicit a shocked reaction from the Well-Manicured Man after we hear from the First Elder saying the virus is mutated. So let's get into the real nitty gritty with that. And I know that you've had.
Well, hold on. Let's pause and just acknowledge that, like, hiring John Neville to say "My God," it's amazing. Yes. It's a great line, and it's great delivery. It's like, this is why John Neville's here.
And it's a great GIF file as well. I love that meme. But yeah, it's my God. But I do love the actual line, a new extraterrestrial biological entity as well. They managed to get Armin Muller-Stahl to say that, which is...
that's not the most complicated thing they get him to say.
True. Okay, well, we're going to go into that. But shall we park that for now? And let's just talk about the actual virus that's mutated then. I know you've had many discussions over the black oil over the course of the seasons of the show. This one very much directly kind of puts it right into the center of attention and what it actually does. And it picks up in the beginning as well, following on from it. But what did you make to this change and the way that the black oil's dealt with over the show and especially this movie?
By the way, it's worth noting that the Well-Manicured Man gets it really quickly. Yeah. Like, he really gets it. It's like everybody else at this meeting obviously had like a half-hour conversation about what was happening with the black oil. The Well-Manicured Man walks in, gets one line of exposition, and the audience who has seen it happen earlier on, and he goes, "Oh my God, I understand immediately." And like has this whole, like, off the top of his head understanding of what it means in terms of reconceptualizing the entire mythology of the show, which again is one of the reasons I really like the Well-Manicured Man. But it's interesting because it feels, it's a very logical repurposing in terms of kind of, well, first of all, fitting with the we are now making a blockbuster movie sort of thing, so we can do the Alien homage that we've clearly wanted to do. Because again, so much of the X-Files is rooted in 70s cinema. And again, it's notable that, like, again, I don't want to step on the toes of people who talked about the first minutes of the show. The first minutes of the movie. The first minutes of the movie are very transparently, we are doing Alien. The way that the ice cave is shot, the way that the creature emerges and stuff like that. And then even later on, when you find out what it's doing with the bodies, all of that are drawn from Alien, which makes a great deal of sense because the X-Files, again, rooted in the context of kind of 70s pop culture, and that's obvious in terms of paranoia, Watergate, Vietnam, those anxieties, but it's also reflected in kind of its cultural touchstone. When we talked about like The Red and the Black and Patient X, we talked about Star Wars being kind of a major touchstone because it was like a movie that many of the people writing for the X-Files, talking about the X-Files, producing the X-Files, would have watched as kids and would have been printed on them and would have been a formative experience. And again, you see that happening with Alien here. So part of that is like, well, we finally have the budget to properly do Alien. So yeah, we're going to do Alien. And again, you can see that later on with, say, Within and Without in the 8th season as well, which is another kind of like moment of the show. And I think they actually, in that case, use the actual sets, or at least the backdrop of sets that have been designed for the Alien movie from the 20th century. Is that what we're calling it now? From the 20th century backlot. But I do kind of appreciate the kind of the idea of the virus and the idea of the virus as something that fundamentally kind of changes you and alters you and turns you into something else. Because again, this is the core theme of kind of the mythology and the core theme of colonization is the idea that, and again, this is something that comes up repeatedly throughout the show, and again, you get, like, even within the movie, the later conversation with the Well-Manicured Man and Mulder, which we'll be talking about kind of later on, recontextualizes it further. But one of the core horrors of the X-Files is the idea that something is coming to Earth, and it is going to do to the European settlers what they did to the indigenous population of the continental United States. It is basically going to enslave them and wipe them out. It's going to take what belongs to them, which is the planet. It's going to basically kill a large portion of the population. And those that it doesn't kill, it is going to enslave or entrap. And again, within the show, you have this idea of abstract horror through kind of this idea of collaboration. It's very clear, even if it hasn't been literally spelled out, but it's very clear that, you know, the conspirators are buying time and trying to save their own lives and the lives of their immediate families by collaborating with the aliens. And one of the things that I like about the immediate kind of shift with the revelation of what the black oil is actually intending to do is that it completely invalidates any attempt to collaborate. It completely undercuts any idea that these characters are going to survive the process that they have been complicit in. It immediately reframes the entire debate. It makes it basically, there is no argument for collaboration after this is done, because what the black oil is going to do is it is going to fundamentally alter you on a cellular level. It is going to use your body as raw material to create something that to you is grotesque, alien, and monstrous. The wonderful line from the Well-Manicured Man, who again grasps this concept intrinsically and immediately. This isn't colonization. This is spontaneous repopulation. It's the idea that, not only will the aliens conquer Earth, they will so completely erase human culture and human identity that there won't be a single person left on the planet, that people are just going to be stock, that we're not actually, for point of comparison, human beings, aren't even dispossessed indigenous people in this analogy anymore. They're just cattle. They're just livestock, which is horrifying and unsettling. But it's very, very effective at communicating, I think, what the film is trying to do, or what the show is kind of getting at, which is this idea of the horrors of colonialism kind of wrought on people who have traditionally benefited from that kind of horror. The settlers who dispossessed the Native Americans. And again, a lot of this ties back to the Paperclip trilogy, which bridged the second and third season, and the Anasazi trilogy, which kind of literalized this by actually having Native American characters and actually drawing that connection by making a point that, Native Americans have been dispossessed and, they are subject to, a government that is foreign to them coming onto their reservations and basically, dispossessing them and kind of treating them in ways that are kind of inhumane and ill-considerate. And having that basically twisted so that the people who have oppressed and dispossessed them are themselves subject to, oppression and dispossession, which is fascinating. Again, really unsettling, and taps into, I think, a primal fear. And again, you can see this in horror going back to stuff like, say, The Shining, which I would argue is a prime example of that, which is a fear that, the hotel is America. The idea that the hotel has been built upon a Native American burial ground. But that it is somehow contaminated by that it is somehow that sin or that crime is somehow imprinted on it, and there's no escaping it. And the idea that, within the X-Files, there's something similar with with the conspirators, where these people have been complicit in these horrible crimes. I mean, Strughold is pretty clearly a Nazi and therefore is complicit in the Holocaust, but that they themselves will then be subject to the same crimes kind of reflected back on them, which is unsettling and grotesque. And kind of one of those prime kind of horror fears is the idea that what you did will find you out, your sins will haunt you, your complicity will be your downfall. And I think that the show captures that well. I think Fight the Future actually communicates that relatively efficiently, if not particularly elegantly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things there. I mean, you briefly mentioned colonization, and we're talking about the Paperclip trilogy with Anasazi and the Blessing Way, as you say, the ideas of, like you mentioned, the Indian burial ground in Shining, but there's also the links to Talitha Kumi, the direct links with the open nature, the kind of explicit nature that the show is actually talking about colonization. But it is interesting how, and I mentioned this in the last minute, how we're seeing things through the well-manicured man's eyes. So he's the one that has all the information that, you've mentioned there, that he grasps it straight away because it's what we've seen, that he's relaying what we've seen to them and just re-emphasizing what we're actually seeing on the screen. But Strughold is kind of saying, well, that changes where do we place ourselves in the colonization, and well-manicured man comes back with we've been duped. The aliens are coming to use us. It's all our work. We've been laboring under a lie, and all that kind of aspect. That
I absolutely love, by the way, that, like, again, this gets a sense of how useless the Syndicate is. That Strughold's immediate response to, well, the colonists have been lying to us. They're not actually going to give us what they promised they would. In fact, they're going to turn us into giant incubating kind of like monster baby sacks. And that Strughold's immediate response when confronted with this existential biological body horror is to go, yeah, but we're just going to ask them. That's the plan. What is your plan? Well, we thought that we might hand over the body to them and kind of like ask them what's going on. That's really the plan here. And it's kind of great. I kind of love that, like, for all that Strughold is obviously a very powerful, very evil man with absolutely no morals whatsoever. Like, that this is so far outside the frame of reference of the conspirators that they're like, well, we could ask them.
Well-manicured man gets it. It's all our work. We've been labouring under a lie. Everything's going wrong. Everything's going tits up. It's not good. This is not good. And they're just going, well, no, maybe not. maybe there's we can work with them. We can have all these like alien type. But it's the reluctance to accept what's right in front of their eyes explicitly. This is going to change everything, and well-manicured man picks that up. It's also interesting how George Murdoch gets a line as well, doesn't he? He gets a line, and I'm not quite sure why that was, but he gets the one saying, oh, maybe it's an isolated case. I don't know. And it goes back to that whole, and they're just not willing to accept it. It's almost like it's the baby out the bathwater kind of scenario. They thought that they were all like in league with them, and they've come to an agreement with them, even though they know. They're all powerful and stuff, but we've accepted something to save ourselves, like they have done in the past, and it's been said that. But
that's the thing, and again, we kind of mentioned that with the well-manicured man and the idea that each of the conspirators has some sort of kind of where they're an allegory or they represent certain worldviews, and there's a sense in which a lot of the conspirators, the American conspirators in particular, say that the cigarette smoking man look at the kind of world and go, well, we are the top dog. We are, inherently the strongest. We can figure our way out of any situation. We can make a deal. We can talk. We can barter. And it's kind of interesting that you have, on the other hand, the well-manicured man who, represents Britain and very much in this movie is associated with England, which is a world power that, by this stage in the 90s had arguably started to come to terms with its fading sun, the sun setting on the British Empire. It's worth noting that, again, in the third season, which again is all about these themes, the third season's amazing, but the third season actually has Apocrypha and Piper Maru set in Hong Kong, which is very much about the dying of the British Empire, because Hong Kong was the last, excluding Northern Ireland, the last foreign protectorate of the British Empire. And so there's a sense in which I think the well-manicured man kind of getting it faster than the others is perhaps a kind of a very subtle, very clever way of underscoring the difference between him and them and between his perspective and their perspective, where as far as the American conspirators are concerned, and again, the First Elder gets the line there, but even the cigarette-smoking man is very much on board with the plan, is along the lines of, well, look, we'll figure it out. We've figured out everything else to this point. There's no way we can lose. We're top dog. We're in charge now. This is the new world order. And the well-manicured man, who is old enough to have lived through the Second World War and to have watched the dismantling of the British Empire, is like, no, you fools, you have no idea what's actually happening, because I have probably lived through a good chunk of this. I understand exactly what's going on here. You need to listen to me, which is kind of an interesting dynamic that's never really emphasized, but you can kind of see it there in the way that it plays out between them.
Yeah, you can. And I think you mentioned at the top of this episode about how are we going to split these 2 minutes up? And I think now is probably a good time to call it a day on today's podcast. and look at the next episode and delve deeper into this, because it's around here where Well-Manicured Man doesn't feel like turning over the infected body is not going to make any difference whatsoever. But then, obviously,
what do they think the aliens are going to say? Like, what do they think are bad? Oops. Defective copy. Never mind. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Here's a rubber man back. Here you go.
Yeah. Or just going to, like, throw their hands up and say, you got us. Fine. Grand. We'll do it your way. Fair cop. Called us out. Yeah. By the way, before we finish up, I actually just want to acknowledge some of the Carter-esque dialogue in this scene, which I imagine was kind of, and again, was probably a bit of something for casual audiences to chew over. I really love, and I apologize, I'm going to mangle this, even though I'm actually reading it from a screen. The geometry of mass infection presents certain conceptual reevaluations for us about our place in colonization, which is a hell of a line to give to Armin Muller style. Which I kind of adore. I kind of adore that Carter's like, yes, he has an Oscar nomination. No, he's not going to get any special treatment.
Yeah. So forget my top of the hour thing of a new extraterrestrial biological entity, because that one blows that out the water. So fantastic. Yeah. So that wraps up this minute. So thank you very much for everyone for listening. Thank you again, Darren. We're back on the next episode, the final episode for us, until later in the film. We will be back together. I think we're scheduled back together later in the film to talk a bit more Well-Manicured Man, if everything goes to plan, which will be great. But thank you very much, and we will see you next time, where the Syndicate cook up a sinister plan for our intrepid Mulder and Scully. And remember, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The giddy carousel of pop.
I opened the magazine. The bits that were nearly sticking out on page 3 were Simon the Bonds.
Bits.
Lads, one of the boys is nearly out the barracks there. I mean, if shorts had been any shorter. But how far apart are his legs? It looks like he's about to go into the maternity ward. How do they get them into these positions? Like, whose idea is it to say, Simon, sit on this stool here with the white satin sheet over it, lift one leg up really high, part the other knee as far away from it as possible, and look slightly to the right and pout.
And if you could just poke your left bollock back into your shorts.
Don't say the C word.
Why haven't we got lightsabers yet?
Yeah, I want one too. Unfortunately, you know where this is going, don't you?
I think so.
Right. The first problem you have with the lightsaber is that it's about a meter long and then the beam stops.
Right.
Can you see the problem with that?
Yeah, lasers have to hit something to stop, don't they? I did learn.
And you can't really stick a mirror at the other end of the lightsaber and just sort of it starts getting a bit silly.
The Movie Palace.
And I don't know about you, but I think Warren Beatty kind of exemplifies that new sentimentality in a way, and it's one of the reasons why I think he fitted very well with not just his role as Clyde, but his role as a producer. And if it wasn't for Warren Beatty, this film never would have been made.
Yeah, he's very interesting in that respect, because he's a very hands-on kind of figure. And, there are films like What's New Pussycat, where he kind of backs out when it becomes clear he won't be able to exert that level of autonomy, for instance. Yeah, it's very true. And, of course, he goes on to be a filmmaker, even an Oscar-winning filmmaker. I think he won the Oscar for Reds towards the tail end of the era you're kind of covering on this podcast, really. So, yeah, I think that's very true.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.